I used the threat of breaking up every time we had an argument just to make him give in. Until the day he simply looked at me and said, "Okay, let's stop." In the world of professional negotiation, there is a tactic called the nuclear option. It is the final move, the one you only use when you are truly prepared to walk away from the table and burn everything down. But in my relationship with Maya, she used the nuclear option like it was a daily greeting. She didn't realize that every time you threaten to leave a man who is doing his best to stay, you aren't just winning an argument. You are slowly eroding the very floor you are standing on. My name is Silas, and I'm a man who believes that a person's word is their bond. If you say it, you should mean it. If you promise it, you should do it. And if you threaten to leave, you should be prepared for the door to actually open. Maya and I had what looked like a perfect life. I am a civil engineer, a man of systems, stability, and long-term planning. I spent my days ensuring that things were built to last, and I brought that same mentality to our home. I was the one who planned our savings, the one who maintained our house, and the one who consistently showed up with emotional support whenever she was stressed. I was the rock, but for Maya, having a rock wasn't enough. She wanted to see if she could make the rock bleed. It started about 2 years into our relationship. We had a small disagreement about where to spend Christmas. It was a normal, healthy debate between two adults. But instead of compromising, Maya suddenly stopped, looked at me with cold eyes, and said, "You know what? Maybe we just aren't compatible. Maybe we should just break up now so you can find someone who wants to do what you want." I was devastated. My heart felt like it had been dropped into a bucket of ice. I spent the next 3 hours pleading with her, apologizing for things I hadn't even done, and eventually agreeing to her Christmas plans just to make her take back the threat. When she finally smiled and said, "I'm glad you realized I was right," I felt a surge of relief. I thought I had saved our love. I didn't realize I had just taught her a very dangerous lesson, that the fear of losing her was a weapon she could use to control me. Over the next year, the breakup card became her primary tool for negotiation. If I wanted to stay in on a Friday night because I was exhausted from a 60-hour work week, she would tell me that a man who doesn't want to take his woman out doesn't deserve one, and then she would start packing a small bag, just to clear her head at her sister's place. If I brought up our budget because she was overspending on luxury items, she would tell me that she didn't sign up for a life of being controlled, and that maybe it was time to call it quits. Every single time, I folded. I was an engineer who hated broken systems, and I saw our relationship as a system I had to keep running at all costs. I became a master of de-escalation. I learned how to swallow my pride, how to silence my own needs, and how to dance around her triggers to avoid that one terrifying sentence, "I think we're done." But something was changing inside me. Each time she made the threat, a tiny piece of my affection for her died. You cannot truly love someone you are constantly afraid of losing. Love requires a sense of permanence, a feeling that no matter how hard the wind blows, the roof will stay on the house. But with Maya, the roof was always unbolted. I began to live in a state of chronic emotional fatigue. I stopped sharing my thoughts. I stopped arguing back. I stopped being a partner and started being a hostage negotiator. I remember one specific evening that changed the internal chemistry of my heart. We were in the kitchen, and I had forgotten to pick up a specific brand of organic pasta she liked. It was a trivial mistake, but Maya turned it into a grand indictment of my character. She began a monologue about how I didn't listen, how I didn't care about her health, and finally, she reached for her weapon. "Honestly, Silas, I don't know why I'm still here. I think I need to move out this weekend. I've already been looking at apartments." I stood there, looking at the pasta box, and for the first time, I didn't feel panic. I felt bored. I realized that she had said this exact same thing 14 times in the last 6 months. And she was still here. The threat had lost its power because it was so clearly a bluff. She didn't want to leave. She wanted me to crawl. But as I looked at her, I realized that I didn't want to crawl anymore. I was a 34-year-old man with a successful career and a good heart. Why was I letting someone treat my devotion like a bargaining chip? I didn't say anything that night. I just apologized, went to the store, and got the pasta. I played the part of the submissive partner one last time. But while I was walking through the aisles of the supermarket, I was making a silent vow to myself. I decided that the next time she pulled the trigger, I was going to let the bullet hit. I started preparing myself emotionally for the end. I began to imagine my life without the constant shadow of the nuclear option hanging over me. I realized that being alone was far less terrifying than being with someone who used my love as a leash. The final explosion happened on a Tuesday. It was a day like any other, but the air felt heavy. I had just finished a very difficult presentation at work and I was mentally drained. I came home to find Maya in a state of high agitation because I had forgotten to reply to a text she sent at lunch about a color for new curtains. "I'm just not a priority to you, Silas," she began, her voice rising in that familiar, rhythmic way that signaled a coming storm. "I'm tired of being an afterthought. I'm tired of trying to make this work with someone who isn't 100% in." I sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't even take off my coat. I just watched her. I watched her pace the room, watched her prepare the killing blow. I knew it was coming. I could almost count down the seconds. "You know what?" she said, stopping and crossing her arms. "I'm done. I can't do this anymore. This is it, Silas. We're over. I'm going to my mom's tonight and I'll have my brother come for my things on Friday. It's over." Usually, this was the part where I would jump up. I would grab her hands. I would tell her I was sorry. I would promise to be better. I would spend the next 4 hours proving my worth. Instead, I took a deep breath. I felt a strange, cool calmness wash over my entire body. It was the feeling of a structure finally settling after years of shifting. "Okay," I said quietly. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of a clock ticking in the hallway. Maya stood there, her mouth slightly open, her arms still crossed. This wasn't the script. She was waiting for her cue to be chased, but the stage was empty. "What?" she asked, her voice losing its edge and becoming small. I said, "Okay, Maya. I agree. If you feel like we're done, then we're done. I think you're right. We've tried, and it's clearly not working if you feel the need to leave every other week. So, go ahead. I'll help you pack your bag for tonight." I stood up and walked toward the bedroom. I could hear my own heart beating, a steady, rhythmic thrum of liberation. I walked to the closet, pulled out her favorite overnight bag, and laid it on the bed. I started taking her clothes off the hangers, the dresses I had bought her, the coats she wore when we went on our favorite walks, and I folded them neatly into the bag. I heard her footsteps in the doorway. She was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. She watched me fold a sweater, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I could hear the sound of her jewelry clinking as her hands started to shake. "Silas, what are you doing?" she whispered. "I'm helping you, Maya. Like I always do. You said you wanted to go, and I'm respecting your decision. I realize now that I've been holding you back by trying to convince you to stay. If you're unhappy enough to threaten to leave this many times, then you should actually go. You deserve to find whatever it is you're looking for." I didn't mean it like that," she stammered, her voice cracking. "I was just frustrated. I was just trying to show you how much I was hurting." I stopped folding and looked at her. I didn't look at her with anger. I looked at her with a profound, weary sadness. "Maya, you don't show someone you're hurting by threatening to abandon them. That's not communication, that's blackmail. And I've realized that I can't live in a house where the door is always half open. I need a home, not a hotel. You've used this threat so many times that the word, stay, has lost all its meaning. You've bluffed your way right out of my heart." I zipped the bag. The sound of the zipper was loud in the silent room, a definitive, mechanical end to the conversation. I handed her the bag. "You said you were going to your mom's. I'll leave the porch light on so you can see your way to the car. We can talk about the rest of your things on Friday, like you said." She didn't take the bag. She just stood there, staring at me as if I had turned into a stranger. And in a way, I had turned into a man she couldn't control. I had turned into an adult who had called her bluff. Silas, please, I'm sorry. I won't ever say it again. I promise. Just let me stay. I didn't mean it. I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye, but I didn't let it fall. I thought about the hundreds of hours of sleep I had lost, the thousands of apologies I had given for sins I didn't commit, and the constant, crushing weight of her threats. The problem, Maya, is that I finally believe you. You said we're over, and for the first time in 3 years I agree with you. I walked past her, out into the living room, leaving her standing there with her packed bag and the ruins of her own manipulation. The silence that filled our home after I walked away wasn't the usual, tense quiet that followed our arguments. It was different. It was the silence of an empty building, a structure that had been condemned and was waiting to be cleared. I sat in the living room, listening to the muffled sounds coming from the bedroom. I heard the rustle of fabric, the clicking of a suitcase latch, and the heavy, rhythmic sound of Maya sobbing. In the past, those sounds would have pulled me back into the room like a magnet. I would have felt an unbearable guilt, a need to fix her pain, even if she had caused the mess herself. But tonight, my feet felt like they were made of lead. I stayed exactly where I was. 10 minutes later, Maya appeared in the hallway. She looked small, her eyes were red and swollen, and she was clutching the overnight bag I had packed for her as if it were a life raft. She looked at me, hoping for one last sign of weakness, one final, "Wait, don't go." But I just looked back at her with the calm, steady gaze of a man who had finally reached the shore. "I'm going now," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She was testing the air one last time, waiting for me to break. "Take care of yourself, Maya," I replied. I didn't get up. I didn't offer to carry her bag. She turned and walked out. I heard the front door open, and then the sound of it clicking shut. I heard her car start in the driveway, and then the fading sound of the engine as she drove away. I sat there for an hour in the dark. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel like I had won. I just felt light. For the first time in years, the air in my own home didn't feel heavy with the threat of a looming storm. I went to bed and, for the first time in months, I slept through the entire night. The next few days were a study in the anatomy of a bluff. On Wednesday, the messages started. They weren't angry anymore. They were panicked. She sent long, rambling texts at 3 in the morning, telling me that she was doing the work, that she had realized her behavior was toxic, and that she promised to never mention breaking up again if I just gave her one more chance. On Thursday, she sent flowers to my office. My colleagues looked at me with confusion as I placed the bouquet directly into the trash can. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of clarity. You cannot fix a foundation that has been intentionally sabotaged for years with a dozen roses. Then came Friday. The day she had originally threatened would be the day her brother came for her things. I spent the morning preparing. I didn't wait for him to arrive. I spent the early hours of the morning packing the rest of her life into boxes. I did it methodically. Her books, her clothes, the kitchen gadgets she loved. I labeled every box with a black marker. I wanted the process to be as clean and as professional as a construction site handover. When her brother arrived, he looked uncomfortable. He was a good guy, and I think he knew what Maya had been doing. He saw the boxes neatly stacked in the garage and he just sighed. "She's a mess, Silas," he said, leaning against his truck. "She's been crying for 3 days straight. She says she didn't mean it. She says it was just a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake, Mark," I said, handing him the last box. "A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. Threatening to destroy someone's life every week for 3 years is a strategy. It's a choice, and I've finally made my own choice." He nodded, shook my hand, and drove away. As the truck disappeared around the corner, I felt the finality of it settle in my chest. It was over. The bluff had been called, and the game was finally finished. A week later, Maya showed up at the house unannounced. I was in the garden, working on the flower beds. She looked different, haggard, exhausted. She had lost the sharp, commanding edge she used to carry. She stood by the gate, looking at the house she no longer had a key to. Can we just talk for 5 minutes? She asked. No threats, no yelling. Just 5 minutes. I put down my shovel and walked over to the gate, but I didn't open it. Maya, there's nothing left to say. We've had the same conversation 100 times. The only difference is that this time, I'm not changing my mind. Why now? She cried, her voice cracking. I've said it before and you always stayed. Why is this time different? Because I finally realized that you weren't afraid of losing me, I said. You were just addicted to the power of making me afraid to lose you. And once I stopped being afraid, you lost your power. I don't want to live in a house where the love has to be extracted through fear. I want a partner who stays because they want to, not because they're winning a negotiation. She stood there for a long time, looking at me. I think she finally saw the truth in my eyes. The Silas who would crawl for her was gone. I had rebuilt myself without the cracks she had created. I lost the best thing that ever happened to me, didn't I? She asked, a single tear running down her cheek. No, I said gently. You threw it away. There's a difference. I turned back to my garden. I heard her footsteps retreat toward her car. I heard the door close. And this time, I didn't even look up. Months passed. I heard through friends that Maya went into therapy. I heard she was trying to understand why she felt the need to push people away to feel secure. I truly hope she finds those answers. I hope she learns that a relationship isn't a game of chicken where the first person to flinch loses. As for me, I'm back to my engineering. I'm building things that are meant to last. I eventually started dating again. I met a woman named Claire. Our first disagreement was about something small, a movie choice or a dinner reservation. I felt that old, familiar tension in my gut, waiting for the nuclear option to be dropped. But Claire just looked at me, smiled, and said, well, we clearly disagree on this. Let's figure out a middle ground, okay? I'm not going anywhere. I almost cried when she said it. The simplicity of it, the stability, the lack of a threat. I realized then that I had spent years living in a war zone, thinking it was just passionate love. But real love isn't a weapon. It's a shield. It's the knowledge that the person standing next to you isn't looking for the exit every time things get difficult. I'm finally living in a house with a locked door and a solid roof. And the best part, I'm the one who holds the key. Wow, that was something, wasn't it? I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I'm still processing some parts, so let's talk about it in the comments. I'll be down there waiting for your thoughts. Don't forget to like and share if you had a good time with me. See you in the next one.